What helped you to learn? Pop your answer in the comments. For some children, being in a learning environment and the actual act of learning can be very challenging, very difficult, and very stressful. Often children who are struggling in a learning environment or a learning context, or who are struggling with their learning, have underlying problems that are causing those challenges. It could be things like specific learning disabilities that are impacting on their learning. It could be neurological conditions impacting on their learning, and it could be developmental conditions or developmental delays that are impacting on their learning and their ability to be in a learning context or environment. When I was working as a teacher aide, I looked for some ways to help children who were struggling with their learning and children who were struggling to be in a learning environment. It didn't quite seem to fit their style of learning. So I ended up developing a learning buddy. This learning buddy was developed off the concept of the octopuses that they crochet up and put into the incubators in the NICU for babies who are born premature. It was just a really easy, really simple and very small item to have on hand and in your desk or in a classroom. So let me introduce you to Bubbles. Bubbles here is my learning buddy. Bubbles only learns if I am learning. So if I choose to mess around in class and I choose to not focus and choose to not pay attention to the learning that's going on in my classroom, then what tends to happen is Bubbles gets very upset and Bubbles doesn't learn. So Bubbles goes away. Bubbles goes back to his home and back to his safe place, and he stays there until I'm in a position where I am ready to learn. And then when I'm ready to learn, Bubbles comes back out again. Because Bubbles will only learn if I'm learning. And Bubbles is very much an interested and keen learner. He loves to learn and he thrives in learning contexts and learning environments. So he's most happy when he's learning, but he only learns through your information being transferred to him. So I found that Bubbles was a very good way of engaging children in their learning. Children would often use Bubbles on the mat, and because he has these tentacles that are all curled, it created a tactile and sensory fidget for the children to play with whilst they were on the mat. So it kept them focused on the teacher and what the teacher was saying. I also found with Bubbles that it was something really small and he was able to be held in a child's hand. It didn't take up a lot of room on the desk, and it was something that the child could fiddle with and fidget with at their desks whilst they were doing their work. And it wasn't a distraction from their learning for them. And it often meant that they just felt like they had a little bit of company. They felt like they had a little comfort thing next to them. And so it just encouraged them to take ownership of their learning and to engage in their learning. I did find, though, that Bubbles didn't work for every child. For children who have severe behavioural issues and severe developmental or neurological issues, I found that Bubbles was not the best approach. They needed a little bit more support than just a simple learning buddy. But it is a very good support for children who are struggling, but they're not dealing with chronic conditions or chronic disabilities. So have a look around and see if you have any children who you think might benefit from a learning buddy, because they really are very, very helpful and very useful in classrooms. I like Bubbles because Bubbles is very sensory. There are lots of textures to encounter with Bubbles. You've got the textures of his tentacles, because his tentacles are spirals, so they feel quite rough. His tentacles can also stretch a little bit, So quite often kids will pull on the tentacles and feel that stretching movement and it pulling itself back. Bubbles is also very, very squishy in his head. So quite often kids will sit there and squeeze Bubbles by the head. And again, it's just another sensory, tactile feeling that children are trying to meet the need of whilst they're learning. Most children find it very difficult, especially if they have neurological, developmental, or specific learning disabilities, to actually stay sitting still. And often those children are needing to seek extra sensory input. Sometimes those children don't need extra sensory input, and so having too much sensory input can have a negative effect. But for the most part, when children are learning, they need some sort of sensory tool, sensory resource that they can fidget with, that they can feel the different textures on, to help their brains to engage. That's something that's really, really important for children with ADHD. Their brains don't tend to engage very easily and very effectively if their body is required to stay still. So children with ADHD do need to be moving a little bit to be able to learn. And so having a learning buddy is a really good resource for them, because this enables them to move without distracting the class. It enables their hands to keep going when they're trying to do some writing or trying to focus on videos on computers. So I highly recommend looking into learning buddies for your classroom. A learning buddy does not have to be this premature newborn octopus. A learning buddy can be anything that is soft, has textures, and can create a sensory feel for children and a tactile feel for children. So work with whatever you have on hand. Find something that works for you and for your students. Thanks for listening. Like and subscribe for more.